sexy on secular sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show with the most ways to piss off your parents. I'm Christy Powell. My co-host tonight, Vila Bianco, is out, but you're in good hands because we are joined by another nonprofit, Rudy B.
A non-binary nonprofit. Indeed.
Yeah.
Hello.
All right. And our special guest tonight is definitely not a prophet, but rather the producer of the ACA's nonprofits. Welcome, Johnny P. Angel.
It's so nice to be back. I'm not a prophet. I don't even know what just happened, let alone what's going to happen. Shoot.
Well said. Well said.
Oh my goodness. So if you want to call in and talk to Johnny for some reason, or if you want to talk to me,
Yes.
which obviously you want to, and Christy, who's amazing, if you want to talk to him, call the show at 512-991-9242. Or if, you want to use the internet, tiny.cc/callsex, because the show is starting right now.
All right. Well, I wanted to start by kind of making sure that the audience gets what we're doing here. I know there are a lot of folks who haven't gotten a chance to catch the nonprofits yet. So let's start by just kind of talking about, right? That's the problem. That is the problem that we are here to solve. And I am on it. I'm doing everything I can. We're doing a nonprofits crossover, giving everybody a little sample of what that looks like tonight.
That's right.
And then we decided to make sure that this coming episode of the nonprofits was just as sexy as possible. I'm going to be on with y'all coming this Sunday. So if anybody has been hesitant, has been curious, has been wondering about this show, but just needed that third heat, needed that X factor, this week is your week. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be bringing the spicy, bringing the sexy, bringing the secularity.
Christy is the X Factor.
I am the X Factor, but this is a really great show, and I want to talk a little bit about it. I mean, Johnny, you brought the nonprofits back and got it up and running just about 6 months ago after a brief hiatus and a little bit of a retooling.
Has it been that long? That's been 6 months.
Wow, really? Wild.
Well, yeah. So we were putting on shows for a long time, and we were working out some bugs in the new format. We have a lot of different hosts, including Rudy, right here, and a lot of guests. We've got you, Christy, as those who will tune in on Sunday in between Talk Heathen and Secular Sexuality will see your lovely face. But we've got a lot of people that are on there. We've got Puck, we got Martin, we got Malty and Jenna, Cynthia, Neil, a whole bunch of people from all around the country and a little bit from all around the world, because we do have Neil and some others from Canada. But we talk about, I think we broadened up the topics that we talk about, I think a little tiny bit. It was my thought that the atheist community is a very diverse community, and there is a lot that we deal with besides counter apologetics, besides debating whether or not, seeing a garbage can flying across the room or a Coke bottle flying across the room is sufficient reason for believing in goblins. And we deal with a world where government is in large part influenced, by and large, by religious people and who use their religious sentiments to sort of shape society. And so, we talk about gender issues, racial issues. We talk about, LGBT stuff. We talk about, immigration stuff. And, even some boring stuff like taxes and how do we want our taxes, education, parenting stuff. We're getting more into sort of parenting, dealing with parents, dealing with kids, dealing with education, things like that. So it's been fun. We've sure learned a lot along the way and made some friends.
It's always about the friends we make on the way. But, there's also a really incredible program that you've put together. What has been your role in getting this project off the ground or back up off the ground?
If you ask the nonprofits, they'll probably tell you that my role has been trying to get the nonprofits to take on more roles so I don't take on roles.
Sure.
But but I've got a great team that we're working together. I brainstorm with the assistant producers on figuring out what are we going to talk about this week? What's in the news? We research all kinds of stuff. Go to different news sites. I'm always talking about groundnews.com, but that's not the only one we look at. Try to find out what are people talking about that intersects with atheism. We share those articles, and then we kind of go over it. What do we want to do today? This was happening today, or it'll happen more tomorrow. Do we want to do this article? I think we could do that. We could pair it with this other article. Okay, now we've got an LGBTQ episode. Okay, what else can we tie in here? But let's always try to bring it back to religion, because that's why we're here, the ACA and all that jazz. And so we do that, and then we pick a panel. We've got a lot of people on the panel now, about 13, I think, and a guest. And so we're reaching out. Shannon Q has said that she'll be on the show, and so I think she'll be on the show. You said you were going to be, and you were, and yeah, I'm sure you will be again. We've got other names that I won't name just yet, but some fun people that have come on in the past and will come on in the future. And then we sit down, we circulate those articles, we take notes, we brainstorm a bit, and then we have that conversation right there live. We do a little bit of pre-convo, but then really it comes out and it sort of flowers. And then the conversation continues because we're in the chat and we're talking to each other and we're sharing links and we're sharing memes and we're making fun of each other and we're, wishing we could all just get together. We will.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry. Last thing I want to say is it's been a godsend to me because I've made a whole bunch of new friends that I get to talk to on a regular basis, and I don't get to see them. So it's really helped with quarantine. So that is nice.
I hear that, and the amount of back and forth of reading through these articles, of having something important and well thought out to say, it shows. I told this story super briefly in the episode that's going to air on Sunday, and I want to make sure everybody catches that episode, so I don't want to get too deep into it, but it's worth pointing out that my first broadcast appearance for the ACA was on the Nonprofits, and I showed up to the studio. I had no idea that I was about to be on air. I had no idea what we were doing, and about 5 minutes before live, the other show host showed up. They said, "Are you ready?" And I said, "Ready for what?" And then we did it. And, the truth is the ACA has gone through a lot of growth and a lot of evolution over the years. There have been a number of phases, most of which I have not been able to participate in, but I have been following everything that comes out of the studio. And, now our studio is everywhere. But I've been watching and participating behind the scenes in all of this for years. And the just the amount of effort and the amount of preparation and professionalism that your team brings to the show is really something to be proud of, and something I think that our audience is going to really appreciate. So I hope everybody will check that episode out.
That's really nice to hear. Thank you, Christy. And I think we got a chance to, before the dark days, before the quarantine, we had one drink once. Remember, we were over on North Loop before the dark times, and I was like, I gotta know this Christy Powell guy. And then, shit hit the fan.
Things turned, but
not over yet.
Are you saying that you were the catalyst? Your meeting was the catalyst. That's what I'm hearing.
I just assume that all good things are because of me, and my girlfriend keeps saying that that's not true, but regardless, I'm going to
Wait a minute. Why is she your girlfriend if she's saying that you are not the cause of all good things?
Yeah. Repetition, though, Christy. Repetition.
Just go ahead and let that sink in. Right. Well, now that we're done celebrating how wonderful all of these shows are, let's put our money where our mouth is and actually show folks watching at least a preview or a sample or a little snippet of what the Nonprofits looks like, secular sexuality style. Let's dive into this first article. We're talking here about an article from ABC News titled "New York City Moves to Dismiss Hundreds of Prostitution Cases, Decriminalize Sex Work." I feel like that's already the nuts and bolts of it. So, Johnny, if you would, I'd love to just hear sort of your take on what this article has to say and what's going on in the world right now.
The way I approached it, that is to say, is it sounds really good. It sounds almost too good to be true. Because I remember this happening when San Francisco started issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples prior to Obergefell versus Hodges. And I remember thinking, I was thinking like, gee, how's that going to work out? Because I think they're all smacked down. But it's my issue is this. I think this is a great step toward not punishing people who can get into vulnerable positions. Now, I'm not talking about professional sex workers, right? People who do it because they want to do it, because they love it, because it speaks to the kind of person they want to be and the way they want to live their lives. There's no problem with that at all. But my issue, and maybe this is where we'll all sort of butt heads a little bit, and I'm looking forward to that, is that the law is on the books. Okay, that is not an excuse to say it's on the books, therefore it's right, therefore we must obey the law. But I am an attorney, allegedly, and to me, the law is on the books. It's a New York state law. My concern with district attorneys, and let's go into the article. District attorneys are choosing to not enforce prostitution laws. Okay. And my concern is that if DAs are choosing to not enforce some laws, but to enforce others, that could lead to a greater, more pervasive culture of law enforcement not enforcing the laws it doesn't like. And there's a short skip between, okay, we're not going to enforce this law because we don't like it because it's politically convenient for us not to do so. And the opposite, which is we're going to start enforcing laws in ways that we might not like when the political winds change. And so that's my concern. And this isn't to say that I think that sex work should be illegal or in any way punishable by law. That's not it. It's that I don't want that decision being made on the DA level. I want the ledge to step in, right?
Yeah.
And set out rules. I mean, whenever a law gets passed, there's so much work that goes into what's the parameter of the new law? What's the parameter of the deregulation or the legalization of it? And let the public weigh in on it. Now, sometimes the courts need to step in. Sometimes I remember Alaska, the attorney general in Alaska decided not to prosecute drug charges, right? There's been cities and states around the country that have chosen not to enforce those laws. And in the short term, that sounds really cool. But in the long term, I worry that it's going to result in a stronger response from the other side to tighten those laws. And two, it gives law enforcement too much latitude in how they choose to enforce or not enforce laws. That's my initial thought.
No, I hear that. Yeah, Rudy, please, you go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's again, talking about how great the nonprofits is. We've heard the legal perspective. Now let's get the sex workers' perspective, right? I agree that it could definitely lead to like stronger opposition, but just hearing that there are people in the legal world who are like, sex work isn't really that bad. I don't know why this is even illegal in the first place. I'm not really going to enforce this. It seems kind of dumb. Is at least a step in the right direction. It's at least seeing cultural change, societal change for the better. Granted, obviously, as Johnny mentioned, the legal stuff needs to go through before any real change is going to happen. But similar to marriage equality being a thing, I think just the fact that we're seeing some places sort of take a stand and say, there's really not a whole lot wrong with this. Maybe we're being discriminatory. Maybe this isn't really that big of a deal. It's a positive sign for the future, for sure.
If
Yeah,
I'm a,
I
yeah,
hear that. Well, I hear that from both of you. And, Johnny, when you talked about these, drugs in particular as a metaphor, it just reminds me that that's a conversation that's been going on here in Austin, as Austin and Travis County have moved to no longer enforce marijuana charges, largely in the area. And the part of the attitude or part of the narrative behind that is that, well, legalization on a federal level is probably on its way, that this is the direction that we're headed, that in the meantime, we can offer a little bit of relief, particularly to poor folks, particularly to poor folks in Black neighborhoods, that we can end this sort of ridiculous rule, this prohibition that we largely as a society seem to be in favor of doing away with. And if it is a step towards a better world, if this is us going ahead and saying, yeah, we're going to make the changes that we need to make, and for now, we're going to go ahead and at least stop hurting people until we make those changes, then that really excites me. But I wonder if that's fool's gold, and if this actually is going to lead to the meaningful change that I think all three of us are sort of hoping for when it comes to the criminalization of sex work, and in particular, the targeting not of the Johns, not of the people in power in that situation, but of the sex workers themselves and the vulnerable people in those circumstances.
yeah. I, and just to be clear, I think I did make it clear, so I'm not really worried about me being branded as some sort of anti-sex worker person. But I think that challenging the enforcement of these kind of laws could draw the attention of the New York Attorney General to have to step in to stop the district attorney, right? And when the AG comes in and has to enforce state law against the city of New York, DAs that decided to do that, get an injunction or however they decide to do that, then that's going to spark, I hope, really the discussion should be happening all the time amongst all of us, amongst our friends and family and maybe not at work, but do we really need to have this kind of law? Or do we need to punish sex work in the way that we do? But I do think we need to be very careful with decriminalizing sex work. From the way I see it, there are multiple reasons why sex work is illegal in most jurisdictions. And it comes down to two, there's probably more, but it comes down to two main reasons. One, it's the impact upon the community, right? Which is like, oh, you're breaking up families, you're causing the spread of disease, blah, blah, blah. And there's the vulnerability of the sex worker to abuse. Mm-hmm. The fact that so many of these arrangements that happen between, like, let's say a manager or a pimp and a sex worker happens behind closed doors. If it's illegal, those conversations, those arrangements happen behind closed doors, and there's really no way to get at it except for sting operations, right? Mm-hmm. But if you make a very highly transparent system that is almost painfully transparent, maybe like that probably takes some of the sexiness out of the transgressive nature of it. Mm-hmm. You leave it open to abuse on the part of government agencies, but you take it's almost like legalizing marijuana, where now you don't have people on the street dealing it. You can just, like in California and a lot of places around the country, you just go to a dispensary and you just go get it and it's done. It's like getting your tires changed, Mm-hmm. And there's expectations as to what you're going to get and what are the consequences for the action. And like I say, I'm not against it at all. I would like it to come from the top down, with the people being the people who motivate the legislatures to make that happen. And then we actually sit down and think about it. How are we going to do it? Who is going to be punished, if anyone, for it? I don't want scumbag pimps who take advantage of people in vulnerable positions to be able to be like, well, hey man, it's not illegal. I can do this thing, right? Mm-hmm. That's what I don't want. And I'm not really worried about the sex worker getting away with it, or even the customer getting away with it. I'm worried about those people that take advantage of people getting away with it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big reasons that a lot of people want decriminalization and legalization of sex work, is so that there can actually be regulation Uh,
Let me just jump in very quickly to point out that there's a meaningful distinction there, though, right? Between decriminalization and legalization. And it's worth pointing out that because of what we see in Nevada, because of maybe the national appetite, or for a number of different reasons, the distrust of government here, that decriminalization seems to be the favored mode of most sex work advocacy groups. And that still leaves the potential, if I'm not misunderstanding, for those backroom conversations that Johnny is pointing out. Now I know I interrupted you, Rudy, but I just want to make that distinction and kind of open that up as well as part of this conversation.
well, no, I think that you're right. There is a distinction there, and decriminalization is certainly a very important first step of just saying, hey, the people that are involved in this are not necessarily victims, but the ones that are need help, and not, just to be thrown in jail. That's not going to help anybody. The people that are legitimately, sex trafficking victims, the people that are down in their luck and have nowhere else to go, because those are people that are sex workers, some of them. The criminalization of sex work is not helping them at all. It is making their lives worse. So that's kind of where the decriminalization sort of conversation is coming from. But then the next step after that is full legalization, regulation, so that anybody involved in the sex work industry has the same protections as any other employee or contracted worker, however you want to look at it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are so many things that there's so much unsexiness about this industry, right?
Sure.
I mean, there's taxes. Taxes, to me, it's a very lucrative area of law. Anyone out there that's interested in going to law school, maybe practicing tax law, you will have all your bills paid.
But it's just not sexy.
Yeah, taxes are not sexy, but they always come into it, right? Regulatory agencies. There will inevitably be a sex work regulatory agency for New York if it becomes legalized, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there will be attorneys and all kinds of other people, policymakers, lobbyists. And they won't be sexy lobbyists necessarily. They will be people who are like, I have these 5-point plan as to why we should do this thing, and we should shift a burden this way or shift it that way. These are important things. And the whole mechanism of humanity comes to play when it comes to when we start legalizing certain things. And that needs to happen because because the market is deciding how we take care of our people. And it's people all along the way, right? Both the customers and the workers themselves are human beings, and governments should be interested in getting some of that sexy cash, and putting it toward perhaps earmarking those funds and putting it toward, I don't know, victims of sexual violence programs, or, training programs for those who are doing it under the table currently now, right? Because they have no or very few other options. Education programs, housing programs, funding, whatever it might be, to get them away from a position where they're doing it out of desperation. And maybe they're doing it because they want to, right? That's my thought.
I mean, as somebody who does a form of sex work and is not in desperate straits, I think of it as sort of artistic photography. Like I made a post on Twitter a while ago about how I was literally standing there with my iron and my ironing board ironing a tearaway Japanese schoolgirl skirt because I had taken some pictures in it already, and I hated every single one of them because it was wrinkly. And I was like, no, this isn't good. These aren't good pictures. And, for people who are like me, who are involved in sex work out of whatever reason that isn't desperation, those regulations being in place and this societal stigma being lifted are really important, really, really paramount in what we're trying to advocate for.
Mm-hmm.
You make a great point that not everyone that does this now, especially with the advent of the internet and cam folks who want to be on and they want to make some income from sexual activities. The world is changing, and I think a lot of the rules that we have against sex work is rooted, anchored, you might say, in traditional religious thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with that said, I'm not concerned about offending baby Jesus. Not really. I am concerned with making sure that if a person is a sex worker, they know that they're more than just a piece of meat, right? And they're doing it because they're choosing to do it and they want to, and it feels good and it's fun, right? And it's lucrative. But that if they choose to do something else, they're not prohibited from doing that. But the world we live in, especially in the United States, especially in the South, has a very negative attitude towards sex generally. And that's really, I think, the source of why sex work has been illegal for so long in the Western world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's typically the idea of like women are sex workers and the men are Johns, and it's like if a man has to pay for sex, then he's shamed, and if a woman is selling sex, then she's shamed. So like the whole process is just full of stigma. Everything about it's full of stigma.
Yeah. So with that in mind, we spoke to Alice Little, perhaps the highest paid legal sex worker in the United States, on the same night that she learned the result of her lawsuit against Nevada, and learned basically that the government was yet again pushing back, showing a complete disinterest and a disrespect for legal sex workers that were operating perfectly within the system, that were doing everything from a like legal standpoint that a massage therapist was doing, and all of these different things. So we can recognize that there is not a lot of hope, it would seem, at this moment for any meaningful change in the way that we legalize and protect sex workers. And, even in Nevada, there's real threats against legalized sex work. And that being the only place in the union where you can legally pursue sex work, those rights are really being threatened. So with this story coming out of New York, with that in mind, with what we see in maybe the stalling out of the legalization of marijuana, is there any reason to believe that this story out of New York tells us anything about the move towards either decriminalization on a local or national level, about the legalization on any kind of level, or even just a shift to a certain extent in the cultural narrative? Is there any room for hope in any direction, or is this one sign not enough to read from?
What do you think, Rudy?
I think legitimately, I didn't think that I would ever see an article like this while I was still in my 20s, at least, of any legal pushback against the criminalization of sex work. I thought that it was a fringe idea that kind of only ran within very secular, very progressive groups. And to think that there was enough pushback against this to warrant a news article was kind of shocking and really encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
I think the fact that we're seeing any pushback is kind of remarkable, considering how much sex and sex work are stigmatized within our country, that it's kind of insane that we're seeing any pushback against the criminalization of sex work at all. I think it's definitely a good sign. I What it will lead to, I don't know. But I think that the fact that there is any social or legal pushback at all is a really big step in the right direction.
I hear that.
Step in the right direction is a segment that we have on the nonprofits.
Yeah, yes, it
I want to
is.
make sure that everybody, beautiful people at home, know that, and they can find more steps in the right direction on the nonprofits, airing between Talk Heathen and not secular sexuality.
Plug.
Atheist Experience, that little show you may have heard of.
Yeah.
I wasn't surprised by that, Rudy. I'm allegedly an attorney, and I know the people in the legal profession, and I also rub elbows with with you people, right? With folks in this community and folks in other communities. There, I guess you would call them liberal progressives with a little bit of conservatives that I talk to, but obviously not people that are like super offensive to me, but like friends of mine that just have more conservative views or very conservative views. I'm not surprised that a DA would decide to do that. Knowing what I know about the legal community, knowing what I know about the history of the law of civil rights and of these kind of things. Now, what would surprise me is if we got huge grassroots movements in outside of New York areas that are trying to decriminalize sex work. New York's is famously, a liberal, point on the map. The fact
Hub.
that they're a hub, you might even say a hub. The fact that their lawyers would do that, the fact that it would probably decrease the amount of arrests and be very popular amongst what is considered a populace that is rife with artists and musicians and people who vote Democrat all the time. I want to see it in Kansas. Then you'll see me do a backflip. If you see it in Kansas, no offense to Kansas, there's lots of great places in Kansas, but Kansas is my go-to place. Nebraska, I'll take Nebraska today. When I see it happening in those places, then I'll be convinced that there's a cultural shift. We're seeing greater numbers of people who are nuns, who are non-religious, who are unaffiliated. We're seeing a growth in these, the humanist, skeptical, non-believing community. And as we see that, we're going to start seeing long-standing traditions in the law and in cultural norms change. And then we're going to see that pushback from the other side. I didn't get a chance to look into, the Family Research Council's response to that, or different groups, the National Review, a place that I like to go to see what the loyal opposition is having to say. What are they saying? Probably it's a terrible idea. Probably it's going to result in child pornography or something like that. But I want to hear what they have to say about it. And when I see the National Review, when I see Matt Gaetz types being in favor of, I know, I shouldn't have even said it. Fuck that guy. When I see those people coming out in favor of let the market decide, then we'll know that it's changed, because conservatives will say, let the market decide. If a person wants to do that, let them, right? They don't, because they have to cater to their evangelical base. When they do that, they can only go so far, but behind closed doors, I bet you they don't give a flying shit about it.
You can say fuck, by the way, on this show. It's all about, this show is all about fuck. You can say fuck.
Well, thank you all for taking me on that emotional roller coaster, because I had it in my mind Rudy's right. This does feel new, and OnlyFans is out, and we have this maybe democratization of sex work, and maybe we will start to see cultural norms change. And then Johnny comes in and points out, but yeah, so what? What does it actually mean? I don't know that we'll find any answers here, but I want to make sure that Rudy gives a chance for our viewers to chime in and jump on the phones.
Yeah.
While they're getting that pulled up, is there any final thoughts? Anything else that y'all want to say here?
I feel like I finalized my thoughts.
I think so. I think compassion is really the rule of the day there, And is it really compassion when you are punishing the people, again, not sex workers who are in it because they want to do it, but, you know, folks who fall on desperate times. People who fall on desperate times need assistance. They need your hand. All of us do. I do, you do, we all do. None of us are so invulnerable, adamantium bones, whatever, that we don't need help now and again. And is a law calculated to make society a more cooperative, compassionate place while still protecting all those who need to be protected? And look at each law in that light. Also, is it feasible? But yeah, I think that's about it.
Okay, I have closing thoughts now, which is that I can't believe that your first thought when talking about invulnerability was Wolverine of X-Men. That's all I have to say about that. Let's get to some calls. We have a couple people on the line. First, let's talk to Jack. Their pronouns are they, them, and they are from England. Jack has wants to talk about what are your thoughts on advocates for the decriminalization of sex work who specifically oppose the legalization of it instead. Jack, you are on with Johnny, Rudy, and Christy. Lots of ease.
Jack, I'm so glad that you're here. We've been having this conversation to a certain extent together for almost a year now. Thank you so much for weighing in. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly wondering because, the way you're talking about some of this stuff, you talk about the group of people who fall on desperate times and turn to sex work as if this is a smaller group of people when it's actually the vast majority of sex workers who are specifically selling sex. I mean, as it is for most people in these kinds of, in like minimum wage jobs, right? Most people who work at McDonald's don't do it because they love the idea of working there. They do it because they need to earn money to live. And that is true of the vast majority of sex workers. And most of us don't tend to enjoy our jobs or do it just for the joy of them. So my question on that is, why would you legislate specifically for the smaller group rather than the larger group of people? Because when we've got like legalization, that means that everyone has to follow these regulations on it. And we know that selective enforcement, when you leave these things up to the police themselves, tends to harm people. So I wonder what your opinion is specifically on people who have this position, that they oppose the legalization of it completely and only are interested in decriminalization. What do you think of advocates for that?
That's a fabulous question. And I know that you've called the show before, and I'm really glad to hear from you on this topic. Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, you're right. And that's actually something I kind of meant to say while we were talking about the article, and I guess it just never kind of came up. But yeah, that is the majority of sex workers is people who fall on hard times. And B, those people might not necessarily want to work under regulation because that kind of defeats the purpose of what they're kind of trying to do. Lots of people work jobs they don't necessarily want to work just because they kind of have to. Sex work just happens to be a particularly lucrative one because it is illegal, therefore kind of sexier, I guess, for lack of a better word. And you can charge more for it because it's an illegal activity. But I guess when I think of, legalizing as opposed to criminalizing, I'm not thinking of it in terms of I'm catering to a specific group of people, because I think at the end of the day it will benefit everyone. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't want anybody to be at, like, whether you are doing the job because you just have to or because you enjoy the work, I don't want anybody to be the victim of trafficking. I don't want anybody to be forced into sex work and not have any options in or any say in the matter or any rights. There's no room for self-advocacy in a space where there's absolutely no regulation. And I don't want that for anybody.
So I don't know if this is like a misunderstanding of how decriminalization works, but that wouldn't be true under decriminalization. Decriminalization means that you get all of the same workers' rights everyone in every other job gets. It just means you're not regulated on top of that. So New Zealand has full decriminalization of sex work, and there, sex workers are able to advocate for themselves the best.
Oh no. Did Jack just drop?
Yeah, that sound means that we've lost our connection with our call system. So we'll work to get that back online and hopefully get Jack back on the air with us.
Jack called back. Sorry.
Yeah, we definitely want
Yeah.
to continue this conversation. I guess I'll just kind of briefly express that in a SimCity type scenario where we can build a society from the ground up, I would love to live in a world where sex work is legalized in the same way that a manicurist, in the same way that a massage therapist is trained, certified, and then licensed. And I would also want that world to include some sort of universal basic income and some sort of social safety net, so that this is not a job that is exclusively falling to people that are in desperate situations, and that we're providing protections. But I don't get to build that world.
No.
And so I do want to be really mindful of what most sex work advocacy groups are saying, what Jack is saying here, because honestly, I want to listen to these people. I want to listen to the people who are affected and impacted by these things and trust them to be the experts on themselves. So when we get into hypotheticals, it can get a little screwy there. But yeah, I think we may have Jack back on the line.
Yeah,
We do. Jack, you there?
Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no.
My internet cut out for a second.
No, it's fine. You're fine. We're just glad to have you back on. What did you think of what Christy had to say in response?
Yeah, I think that is important, right, to consider what advocates want across the board. And I know that in the UK, we have like Swarm, we have the ECP, which is the English Collective of Prostitutes. And in the USA, you have the Sex Workers Outreach Project USA. Basically, every advocacy group that I'm aware of, besides the ones in Nevada, is advocating for full decriminalization of sex work. In fact, I see almost no organizations of sex workers that are arguing for legalization broadly, because most of the people that they're serving as constituents are people who wouldn't benefit from legalization. Because like legalization can mean a lot of things, right? There are lots of different legal models. So when people say legalization broadly, I have no idea what they're advocating for. It's legal in the UK and it's horrific because the specific ways that we regulate sex work here cause a lot of harm. So, I mean, when someone says legalization, I wonder, what do you mean? Do you mean everyone has to be licensed to do sex work? In which case, anyone who is homeless and doing sex work to survive is now breaking the law and can be arrested. Yeah. I assume no one here would want that, right? I don't assume that's what you mean by it. But when I hear legalization, I wonder, what specific regulations are you imagining? Because if you decriminalize sex work, you already have the generic worker legislation covering you. Babysitting isn't legal, it's just not criminalized, right? And that's still, you have protections if you're a babysitter and someone doesn't pay you. Like, that's how it would work. So I guess I'm usually confused by what people are imagining as the regulations.
That's a really good question.
Yeah. And I appreciate your input on that a lot, because to be clear, I'm a sex worker who is not operating as a prostitute. I'm not doing anything that would require decriminalization. Destigmatization is something that I care a lot about for my own work, but decriminalization or legalization is never something I have had to worry about. And yeah, kind of like what Christy said, I would defer to the thoughts and the research and the opinions and the experiences of people who are in that situation, who are advocating for themselves. You know what you need. I certainly would. I don't know enough about the topic. As you pointed out, what do you mean by legalization? Maybe I'm fully talking out of my ass. You could be absolutely right. And that's just true. I could fully just be talking out of my ass. I have no idea what I'm talking about. And I would much rather defer to people who are in the shit, people who are in the middle of it, because they are going to know what they need more than anybody else is. And I really, really appreciate you calling in to bring this up. I think that that's great. I think it's great for the listeners, and I think it's been great for us.
Well, Jack, I think what you're talking about is something that I stumbled across. Was when we have legalization, it comes with a battery, if that's the right word, of regulations and standards and procedures. And the concern, I think, from decriminalization advocates is that legalizing and regulating isn't going to meet the concerns of vulnerable populations working in sex, right? Is that there will still be those folks who can't meet those regulatory standards, those permitting standards, those facility standards that regulation would set up. And so you'd still have a different, a legal tier of sex worker, and you'd have an illegal tier of sex worker. And there would be no reason why a person would graduate to the legal tier, that there would still be an incentive to stay in a deregulated state. And therefore you would still be vulnerable to the same pressures that you were before legalization, before regulation. Is that kind of where you're coming from?
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And legalization requires police involvement in the lives of sex workers, whereas decriminalization does not. To be able to enforce certain legislation and certain regulations, you have to have either some kind of registry of sex workers, which it has to exist so that they can enforce these regulations, or they have to be enforced on an individual basis against vulnerable populations, often who are immigrants, who already have lots of reasons to fear police.
So what would you recommend? I mean, would you say that, and I want to put you on the spot, but would you say that let's say a pimp, and if that's a dirty word, then a sex worker agent or manager, would those folks under your ideal system be subject to the long arm of the law, so to speak? Or would they be free of consequence for their actions?
So the problem here is the framing, because it's already illegal to coerce someone into sex, whether that's for money and you charging for them having sex with someone else or for them having sex with you. That thing is already illegal. It's sexual assault. There's no reason for specific regulations around sex work, because people who are pimping out those who do not want to do it are already breaking a massive number of laws. There are tons of them that already regulate this within sex stuff, because otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. If you did that but not for money, obviously that's illegal. Introducing money changes nothing. The idea that we need regulations on sex work to make those things illegal when they already are is kind of ludicrous to me. The problem is these things aren't enforced. The same with any kind of sexual assault. In the UK, we have about a 1% conviction rate. If you're assaulted, you have a 1% chance of your abuser actually being convicted. And the same thing applies within sex work stuff, but even less because it's so stigmatized. Adding laws that specifically prohibit people from pimping, all they actually do is stop sex workers from advocating for ourselves. We have pimping laws here in the UK, and pimping laws mean that if I joined up with a sex worker friend of mine and we worked from the same building, but if I ever wrote anything down regarding who she's seeing, say I made a list of clients she sees, now I can go to prison because I'm breaking pimping laws, because you can't apply them just to certain people. The police apply them across the board, and that means that sex workers advocating for ourselves are now breaking pimping laws when those pimps were already breaking other laws anyway, so there was no reason for them.
Well, it sounds like a poorly drafted law. It sounds like it's overbroad. What about a more narrowly tailored law? Like let's say you were a sex worker and you were part of a cooperative, right? And you somehow were able to make a regulatory distinction between a person who's engaged in it and you have, again, we come down to regulation where, almost like an LLC, a limited liability company in the United States, where you have members and you have official voting and you have a record that you follow. What we don't want to do is toss a sex worker who is vulnerable from one bad situation to another, where now we've created this outlet where all you have to do is meet these 99 criteria and you'll be fine. We don't want to do that. That doesn't do anything for anybody. All that does is generate income for that regulatory agency and become another target for religious groups who are trying to put it out of business and ultimately defund that organization so that it can't even do the job that it was designed to do. But what if there was a way to narrowly tailor it by some sort of commission by sex workers who come up with rules that are vetted by? I'm just throwing ideas out here, but to say that it's all one or all nothing seems to me almost like hopeless, because we've done this before. We've regulated touchy subjects. We do it with bars. We do it with legalizing marijuana throughout the country. We can do it there. Why can't we do it here in a way that meets the needs of the workers themselves with full workers' rights and the ability to gather together in collective labor unions and what have you? Do you think it's impossible, or do you think it's just difficult? There's my question.
Yeah, I think it's impossible because generic worker legislation already covers all of the things you're talking about. If you were running an entire brothel, you would be subject to all of the generic worker legislation that exists in the US or the UK or wherever you're doing it, which would require you to have acceptable conditions for the people within, that you're not abusing your members of staff, etc. Right. If you're functioning as a business in this way. But what it wouldn't do is regulate the concept of sex work, so that by virtue of doing sex work, you are treated as this kind of formal business structure. If you form a formal business structure, then you have to comply with generic worker legislation. If you don't have to comply with some additional regulation. I mean, you imagine this board of sex workers discussing this legislation. What they would come to at the end of the day, if you picked sex workers from the organizations that already exist, like Swarm, like the English Collective of Prostitutes, people well educated on these topics, the conclusion they would come to is that such a regulation shouldn't exist. So you would have to cherry pick sex workers that already agree with you to be able to form a board in the first place, which means you have this massive selection bias. I mean, I don't know a single sex worker personally who would advocate for anything but decriminalization who is actually selling sex, especially because these regulations would always preclude the most vulnerable people. They're never going to make it so that a person selling sex on the street is complying with these regulations. If you and a group of people are selling sex on the street to people driving past in cars, how are you ever going to comply with whatever regulations they put in place? They're never going to make that be one of the things that's allowed, are they?
Probably.
Jack, you need to start a podcast.
Yeah, Jack, do you have any material that you would recommend that the viewer? Sorry, Christy. Do you have any material that you would recommend the viewers of the show should review? And if you do, could you please put it in the comments? And the nonprofits and probably Christy and the Secular Sexuality crew will be interested in reviewing it and maybe having another episode on the subject.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I should still have your email if that's all right. I'd actually love to touch base with you and see how we might be able to continue this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, feel free to drop me an email. I have a ridiculous number of resources, a ridiculous amount, all collated in folders. I'm ready to go.
That's good. Yeah, and please, can Christy? Does Christy have permission to share your email address with me?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, cool.
Well, great. I really appreciate you illuminating this for us. And I definitely do want to be in touch and see what kinds of resources we might be able to put in front of our audience and what kinds of ideas we might be able to further from there. For now, I do want to make sure to get to our next article, but I really do appreciate you taking the time to touch base with us.
Yep, it was great talking to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks
so much, Jack. Have a great night. Wow.
It gives me a lot to think about. I mean, again,
this is feels like I know we already said this is secular sexuality, but also the nonprofits. But now it really feels like it because we're got the nonprofit style conversation, but with callers. It's great.
I know that would be awesome to have callers on the nonprofits. This is a different format, but shoot, makes you want to be on more episodes, doesn't it?
Right?
Okay.
Just sort of a sample again of what y'all do and jump into another article if we may.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Now, this is a topic that I know was covered on last week's episode of the nonprofits. I really encourage any viewers who didn't catch it to take a moment and go back and watch that episode. I wanted to see if we could recreate any piece of that conversation, because this is a topic that definitely needs to be discussed. And that, of course, is the tragic slayings in Atlanta of 6 sex workers recently, targeted in large part, we believe, because of their race, because of the work that they were doing. And there's a lot that I want to get into here. What kinds of things can y'all share with us on this topic?
I think one of the most important parts of this article is the fact that they were allegedly sex workers.
Right. This is a complicated thing as we're talking about massage parlors. I guess I should have mentioned we are specifically talking about an NPR article, Atlanta Killings, Sex Worker Advocate Sees Deadly Consequences of Overlapping Hatreds. And that'll, of course, be is already in the footnotes for this episode. But please, Rudy, continue.
Yeah, there's already a stigmatization of Asian women in particular as being fetishized, sexualized. There's this stigma about, being specifically a woman working in massage. I've known non-Asian women who work in massage who were propositioned for sexual favors, and they were just like, I mean, I'm talking about a Jehovah's Witness woman that I knew who worked in massage, and a client was just like, so when does the sex start? And she was like, get out. Leave.
What? I hear that, Rudy, and I definitely don't want to disagree, nor do I want to come in and declare anything over anybody or create facts when I don't have them. But I also have to acknowledge the type of massage parlor that this business is. We have to acknowledge the established criminal history. Criminal, of course, is not the same thing as wrong or bad, but the established criminal history of these locations. And I do think that we have to be not naive about the fact that this is, a traditional rub and tug massage, that is right. Very much a reasonable expectation at this establishment or these establishments.
Right. I guess my only point saying that is that there's sort of stigmatization all the way up the line for these women that were killed. They're working in an industry that if you're a woman, it's automatically associated with sex.
Sure.
And then on top of that, they probably were involved in that. And even if they weren't, they're Asian women. So they're already stigmatized as being, fetishized and sexualized. And on top of that, they're just hated for even being perceived as sex workers. Whether or not they actually were, just the perception in and of itself is enough. And there's been so much in the news lately about hatred against Asian people, not even, Asian women in particular, but Asian people because of COVID, I guess. Like, I still don't understand that. And maybe it's just because I'm not a racist, but I fully don't get it.
Well, let me say at least COVID. A tiny bit. Yeah, exactly. It's not COVID. It's the president of the United States repeatedly saying China. And pointing that finger and, the Kung flu and all of this, really offensive rhetoric that demonizes Asian folks.
Yeah, that's, I guess I don't, it's not that I don't understand where that came from. I guess that I can't put myself in the mindset of hearing that and thinking that that's legitimate.
Sure.
Like, oh, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely their fault. Yep, I hate those guys. Like, that doesn't compute for me.
Well, it doesn't compute because you're a thinking person and you care about other people and you don't label them based upon phenotypes, right? Or national origin. But we talked about this on the show, and I'm really glad that we're on the show again talking about it because we left a lot on the table. We always do in the nonprofits. if you tune
Yeah.
in, we've got a lot more to say than we get a chance to say in the short amount of time. And part of that is
Right.
maybe having less articles.
Like,
because
if there's anything frustrating about the nonprofits, it's how much we have to leave on the cutting room floor.
Ugh, gosh.
Well, and that's a conversation we had in post after the last episode that I was on. I think that's part of the beauty. You know, you have 4 people, you crowd the space, you get a bunch of obnoxious people that like to talk, that have opinions, and then you all make them compete so that the best ideas, or at least the loudest ones, tend to rise to the top. I think there's value in that format.
Do you think that's how it happens, Christy? Is that
I
the
think
impression?
I think
That
it
is
I
the
think it
way
is.
I'm marketing it anyway. When you see how the sausage is made,
I don't wanna
maybe
do
there's room
that.
to question it.
As the producer, I'm going to command everyone to tell me that that's not what I'm doing. No, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm really trying to get, like, we've got all these interesting people with different perspectives, different takes on it. And I want to make sure everyone's getting it in. Well, that's more of a Thursday thing.
Everybody's getting it in. Yeah, that's our
everyone's
show.
getting
Thanks
it
so
in.
much.
But it's Thursday somewhere, and right now it's in Austin, Texas. But we talked about purity culture. To me, that's really where this one's at. I mean, the Asian spa thing, if these are, what did you call it? Rub and tug?
Yeah, that is a term, perhaps a pejorative one.
I
but
didn't
one
know
that's
that. I never heard
also-
that term.
Mhm.
There is we talked about purity culture, shame, the black and white view that a lot of religious, or let's just call it extremist groups, have towards morality. There's this cosmic battle taking place all around you in a dimension that is infused in the dimension that you see right now, right? And you're either on the side of light or you're on the side of the abyss.
You're literally describing my childhood.
Yeah, and it's spiritual warfare, right? Like, that's
Spiritual
the terminology. You are at
you
war.
Are you a paladin, or are you, what's the opposite of a paladin?
Necromancer?
A dark paladin?
Dark paladin, a dragon knight, I don't know, a demon swordsman. I don't know.
You're not playing enough D&D.
I was going to say the ACA needs a D&D show.
I'm going to run it. I'm going to start it.
Make it so. But there's no options for nuance, right? And we talked about this in the show. I'll talk about that. I looked at the website for the Crabapple, was it Baptist Church? I think it was. All right. Fuck the Crabapple Baptist Church. I mean, not to the extent that they've distanced themselves from their murderer who is a member of their community, because I would do that if I were in charge of that community. But the fact that I'm willing to bet a few pennies, because I don't have, I'm not a gambling man, that the rhetoric that they have been shoving in that guy's face since conception onward has been this spiritual warfare. You were either a paladin or you were a goblin king. I don't know, whatever. And the fact that as a human being, he woke up like all of us do every day with some form of imperfection, some sort of less than ideal sense of ourselves, right? A boner, perhaps, at the wrong time, or something like that. And now this purity culture, the shame is upon him that if only he could just get right with God, that he could somehow be fine with the world, but he fails every day. Every moment of his life, he is a worthless, disgusting, putrid creature, and only through the saving grace of the Lamb of God and all of his blood that's all over the place, that he can be fine. And that works its way into a person's psyche, right? The church put that on him, not with the intention that he kills anyone or the intention that he kills himself or harms himself, but that there is this unrealistic expectation that you can actually live like that. Fuck that. Mm-hmm. We make mistakes constantly. We just try. We strive toward being more compassionate, more forgiving, more cooperative, standing up for what's right. But these old religions, these old traditions, they don't make their points on subtlety. They make it on big swaths of color. You're either in or you're out, right? And a person who has perhaps psychological fragility, a person who has esteem issues and has access to guns might, in those circumstances, decide to rectify the situation as the police officer did, on a really bad day, right?
Oh.
Right.
Yeah, horrible to say, but for him, that's probably what it was. It was a really bad day. Nothing was going right, and he decided to maybe make it right. I'm not guessing what's in his head, but a better attitude, I think, towards anyone that's going through not living up to their own standards for goodness is not that you are either worthless and must come to the healing truth of the Lamb of God. Is more like, take one step at a time towards your ideal, towards your goal, right? Accept that progress is not a straight line. I mean, Christy, you are a therapist. You don't tell your people either they're 100%. If you're not first, you're last. Ricky Bobby style, right?
Yeah, no, I was told today that I am an evangelical for self-compassion, which is really what we're talking about here. This idea that there is a self-critical voice in all of us that says, you can't do it, you're not doing it, you fucked up, you're a mess. And that's not an effective teacher, not nearly as effective as somebody who comes beside you and says, you know, you didn't live up to your ideals today. That makes sense. I can see why you would do that. How can we work together to change that? And, you know, the research on that is huge. I definitely want to point everybody listening to the work of Kristen Neff and a number of other places. But to get back to this on hand, I have to point out, Johnny, that maybe the thin veneer that goes on top of that, like spiritual warfare and, God versus demons and angels and all of this, is the pseudoscience of sex addiction, which is a notion that we've covered on this show to the best of our ability, but that we can never say enough about. The too long didn't read is to say very simply, you cannot become addicted to sex. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. I've read the studies. I can point you towards the studies. I have pointed you towards the studies and will continue to do so. Yes, sex can be problematic in our lives. Obviously, we're here talking about this each and every single week. We're talking about sex. We're talking about sexuality. Sex is complex and sex can be problematic. So can golf. If you are spending too much money.
Oh, we lost Christy.
If you're spending too much money on golf,
your relationship on golf. Okay, I just kept talking. I wasn't sure if y'all were still hearing me or not.
No, we were not. But but we get I think that we all got the point. Anything can become problematic if it becomes a fucking obsession.
Yeah, if you're spending all your time on it, if you're spending all your money on it, if it is causing issues in your relationship, like anything can become problematic in those ways. And I get it. If your life is really miserable, if your relationship is deeply unpleasant, if you are terribly unhappy and you get a tiny rush of dopamine every time you buy a new driver, I can see how you could get really roped into that and find yourself deep.
Oh, no.
Are you a golfer, Christy?
I actually don't know shit about golf.
Okay, because you sounded like you knew something about golf.
I feel like you're saying something to me about my D&D minis. Every time I get a new one, I'm like,
consideration. It's a but in any case, you are not spending too much time, money, or energy on porn or on sexuality or on sex because you are addicted to it. You may be struggling for some other reasons and in some other ways, and I would encourage you to talk to me or some other fine, great, and wonderful therapist, but it's not an addiction, and it's certainly not an excuse to murder innocent people.
Piggybacking off of Christy, if you do want to spend an absurd amount of money on porn, my OnlyFans username is... okay, sorry, I just had to make that joke. I just had to.
Sure.
Yeah, anything can get you out of whack. Absolutely anything. You're right. I mean, I think it's boring, but it's probably not boring to those who are really into it. Golf, right? It's a sport. It's you can get good at it. So I hear.
It's a sport.
It's a sport. Like pool's a sport. I love pool. Is it a sport? There should be some other term for it besides it. But
a competitive game.
We
Well,
all know people that read too much, like they don't want to engage,
Exactly.
with paying their bills or eating healthy or whatever it is. Life is juggling. Life is always juggling. And maybe you choose to juggle with less balls. Today's Thursday, if you want to. But truth be told, like if you're favoring one thing to the exclusion of all others, I have a friend, wonderful friend, who is an artist, a professional artist, who told me recently, like a real artist, not like a trust fund kid who like paints on the side, but like a real artist who busts her ass to like make a living off of it. And even she pursuing something that is beautiful and skilled and is advancing like the world of beauty around her. She's like, I worked too much in 2019. I missed out on a lot of stuff. I should have stopped and smelled the roses. It's good advice for anybody at any time, I think. Just step back.
Well, and there is certainly a lot more to say about this topic. And for that reason, I'm going to continue to point people towards the nonprofits. The episode in which y'all discussed this, I felt had some really, really beautiful and important points. For now, I do want to make sure to take one last caller before we tackle our last article and wrap things up for the night. But I guess I just don't want to get too far away from saying that when we create these narratives around sex as something that is out of your control, as something that is either an addiction or pathologize it in a medical sense in that way, or when we create these ideas that your body is being tormented by literal demons that are outside of your power, suddenly your personal responsibility starts to evaporate. And when you convince yourself that you're not responsible for your own actions, your actions can become terribly, terribly grisly. And while this may be a very extreme example of that, I think we all know that this is a extreme example that is becoming more and more and more normalized. And it's exhausting to hear.
Oof. All right. Let's talk to one of our callers. Colson in Texas wants some advice on how to properly respond when a friend comes out to you. Colson, you're on with the three Y ending names, Johnny, Rudy, and Christy.
We've got just a few minutes, Colson, but I'd love to hear from you. What's on your mind?
Sure. So I was recently faced with the situation where an old friend of mine came out to me as bisexual. And I'd like to think that I responded well, as you know, of course. But I basically just wanted to get your thoughts. This is a little bit less, I guess, dense of a topic as the previous ones on the show today. But just your thoughts, just general advice on, as an atheist or as a, just a secular humanist or as a decent person, when a friend of yours comes out to you, I mean, what's the best way to respond? I think my response was, I wouldn't say like apathy, but it was something like, "Oh, that's great, cool."
Yeah.
But I would. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, but go ahead.
Oh, I would say, as somebody who has come out to many friends and family members, I've had some responses that were just like, all right, yeah. And I've had some responses that were like, cool, I love you, it's fine. I would say it depends on the way your friend came out to you. That is appropriate. Mm-hmm. Because if your friend is really nervous and making a really big deal about it, the apathetic response is probably not the one they needed. They probably needed like the full spectrum of validation and like all the support, because if it was that nerve-wracking in their head, they were probably expecting a really bad response. So kind of, I guess it's like meet the person where they seem to be at. If most of the time that I've come out to people, it's been pretty casual. Like when I decided to start using they, them pronouns, I texted a few friends and was like, hey, I'm non-binary. I'm using they, them pronouns. And most of them just texted back like, okay, I love you. And that was fine, that's all I needed from them was like, okay, was like affirmation and confirmation that this wasn't going to change our relationship in any way. But you know, when I was a teenager and I came out to my parents, it was at a family worship evening, and I was like, okay guys, I'm gonna tell you something at some point. And they were like, tell us right now. And then my mom was like, oh my God, are you pregnant? And I was like, no, it's a good thing. It's fine. And then I was like, I'll just wait till the end to tell you guys. And they're like, well, no, you got to tell us now. You've brought it up. And I was like, okay, I'm bisexual. And they were like, I thought you said it was a good thing. And I'm like, well, it's better than being pregnant. I said that in response to you saying that maybe I was pregnant. So yeah, it's a good thing as opposed to being pregnant at 16. So
Right.
yeah. But I'm only telling those stories just to say, as somebody who has come out in various circumstances and various levels of anxiety, my family responded to that just by being like, well, let's move on and never address that again. And even though it wasn't like opposition, it still hurt because it wasn't the support that I needed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Of course.
I'll just say very quickly, Colson, as we're trying to make time for one last caller before we wrap up tonight, that it's just validate. You know, it makes sense to see this as like sort of a non-issue. Be like, oh, okay, cool. I didn't necessarily care, but you want to give it the amount of weight that they give it. If this is somebody who is expressing it in a tone that lets you know that this made them feel very vulnerable, you want to acknowledge those feelings. You want to validate, hey, I can appreciate that might have been difficult for you to share, or man, you might feel really exhausted from having to share this over and over, or wow, you may have had some experiences where people were really shitty about this. So it makes sense that it would be kind of difficult here. Who wouldn't be struggling with these things? But if they express that they're fine, then I think that you can share that you're fine. Ultimately, it becomes about recognizing the emotions that they're experiencing and just letting them know, human being to human being, co-regulating with them as members of this species, that whatever it is that they're feeling makes sense. That you get it, that you may not necessarily exactly understand what they're going through, but that they came to those emotions through reasonable means, that their experiences dictate how they're feeling right now, and that however they're feeling, you see them as they are. Just validate, and let them know that, yeah, you're safe with me. We're good. I don't necessarily care, but I care to the extent that you care, or I'm concerned to the extent that you're concerned, and just join them, meet them where they're at, and co-regulate in that way.
Can I say something?
So much, all of you, and
sorry, Colson.
Sure, yeah.
That's great. I hadn't thought about it from Rudy's or Christy's perspective, because my response would be like, okay, cool. But situational awareness is important, right? If you're seeing the person having an emotional response to it, if you're a good friend, you want to meet the person where they're at and make sure that you're a good support system. I mean, if you tease each other a lot, you might choose to find a way to show your support with like friendly, I don't know, some way that's supportive, but you don't want to make them feel alien either, right? Because they came out as something that they didn't present themselves out as before. But yeah, a friend of mine told me not too long ago that he was bisexual. I was like, oh, all right. He wasn't nervous about it either. I was like, oh, okay. And then like the gears started turning. I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. And then we went back to teasing each other about everything in the whole wide world, I mean, and nothing changed. He's got a friend here. Nothing going to change about something like that, Tease him about something else. And if I gauge that he wants to be teased about, I don't even know what to be teased about, then I'll wait for him to take the lead on it. Right?
Yeah, I will say, Johnny, I make gay jokes about myself all the time, so my friends know that it's okay to also do that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate you calling in. You have a great night.
Yeah.
You too.
Thank you.
All right. Well, lightning round, Johnny. I hate to put you on the spot, especially because I know the amount of effort and preparation and thought you put into these things, but I would love for you to just very quickly, if you can, walk us through this last article and hopefully give us just a little bit of time at the end to take one last call if we can.
Yes, sir. I can do it. Okay, so what happened? We have an article here. I believe it was. I don't remember what the source was. We like to share our sources.
This is from the Guardian. Stuart Robert on Crusade says woman who hired sex worker on NDIS. Again, those articles are in the show notes of this episode.
All right, here's my notes. I'm going to give you the quick lowdown here. All right, so Jane, that's not a real name, lives with multiple sclerosis in Australia. She sought to include sex work services in her National Disability Insurance Scheme, NDIS. The NDIS rejected it, saying that it does not fund participation in sexual activity. She went ahead and appealed it to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and they ruled that a woman was entitled to services of a sexual therapist specifically trained in treating disabled people. The tribunal said that she should receive $10,000 a year to fund the treatment. Quote, she has sexual needs. She attributes her inability to locate a partner to her disability and explained why that is so. The tribunal did not publish why the special nature of the case resulted in that, but she could not find a partner that help her obtain sexual release, nor if she ever could find a partner, she would be able to sexually stimulate her partner because of matters referred to in the confidential reasons. We won't get into that because we don't know what it is. Her condition also prevents her from masturbation. And so there was an appeal to the federal court, and the court ruled that the previously stressed, the NDIS had stressed at that level that it did not cover sexual services, sexual therapy, or sex workers in a participant's NDIS plan. And the minister, Stuart Robert, who's taken the heat in this article that we're covering, confirmed that it would appeal to the federal court. The federal court ruled unanimously in favor of June. Okay, on I think a technical point. The agency's position was that it does not fund participation in sexual activity. The NDIS Act does not expressly or impliedly exclude such activities from being funded. They said that the services sought by the respondent, Jane, as revealed by the evidence, she chose to refer to it as sexual therapy to distinguish it from what might be called standard prostitution services. And the NDIA was like, well, with all due respect, we don't do that kind of stuff. And that this was an unreasonable interpretation of what is considered reasonable and necessary. Now, advocacy groups have called on the NDIS to formulate a sexuality policy to help properly guide the agency in assessing requests to use NDIS funds for sex toys, dating support, and sex worker services. Saul Ibister, president of Touching Base, which helps connect sex workers with people with disabilities, said it was important that paid sexual services are recognized as a legitimate option for people with disability if they so choose. People with disabilities, just like anyone else, want to enjoy commensurate, intimate experiences as part of their exploring their physical, social, and emotional needs for sexual intimacy and sexual expression. He said a blistering criticism of the minister, Stuart Robert, accusing him of embarking on a personal crusade to bypass a landmark decision of the federal court.
I appreciate you running us through this so quickly. To me, this in some ways may answer or dovetail into our conversation with Jack, because once you have created this, I refer to myself as a sex therapist, but if we create a sexual surrogate therapist or some other position where we're recognizing a licensed and certified and maybe regulated industry of sexual therapies, then perhaps it does sort of work into that legalization and decriminalization framework. Ultimately, though, it's worth pointing out that there is value, of course, in a sexual therapy. And it's upsetting to think that even in a progressive place where such a thing is allowed to exist, and where there is the opportunity, or at least the possibility, of federal funding and disability services to create access for such a thing, that there are still DAs and other politicians that are willing to make a name for themselves by being, hard on sex workers, by being willing to like carry out this stigma. Is that how y'all see this story?
Yeah, I the only thing I really have to add, as we are sort of pressed for time, is just that I learned about sort of the ableism that is specifically associated with people with disabilities and having a sexuality of any kind. In college, I was taking an occupational therapy course, and sexual activity was one of the things that it was like, this is what a normal person needs to be able to do. And I'd never thought about that. And sort of the realization of, everybody needs some kind of sexual outlet was just, it sort of changed my outlook on things, because I'd never really considered that before. But it's a necessity for most people to just have a normal sexual outlet. And if you are disabled to the point where pretty much the only way that you can have a normal sexual outlet as a functioning, consenting adult is to hire a sex worker, then why the hell not?
I want to read the specifics of the case. I mean, maybe a lot of it aren't available. A lot of the facts aren't available. But to me, I think there wouldn't be as much of a pushback if it were not government funds, that is taxpayer funds. I think that's where it's really coming down to, because it rubbed me the wrong way. I bristled. Not as a Puritan, but I need to know more about it, because necessity to have sexual contact, it sounds very easy for me to say that. And I'm not a person who's disabled to the point where I can't get any contact, or it's extremely unlikely, or whatever the experience is that this person just can't, and what it must be like to be so in need of touch, and how that must affect a person. It's the having the government pay for it. Let me put it a different way. Having everyone have to pay for it is, I think, the big push. Discounts for folks in that position, I don't think would have gotten as much of a pushback, and we could easily say, what a scumbag, Stuart. Let them do what they need to do. You take advantage. You have this ability privilege. I don't know what he looks like, but perhaps, many people would be interested in having, consensual sex with him. And if it were such that he couldn't, would he change his tune? There's compassion again. I don't know. I want to know more about it, but this is the kind of thing that Fox News types zero in on, and they have a good laugh. Look at what they want us to do now, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And there is a story here, and this court, I don't know what the balance of the Australian this particular federal court in Australia is. I don't know what their leanings are. I don't know what the political, I know we have people in the community who are in Australia, and maybe they could weigh in on this and they know more about the justices. But to me, if the court found on that technicality that it wasn't categorically or impliedly excluded, then that's bad drafting on the part of the legislature. It was probably drafted that way. I mean, I don't even know if the legislature even would have contemplated that they could have hired sex workers as being covered in the NDIS protections or scheme. But I don't know. That's a real tough one, and I want to see. from a psychological perspective, what is the effect upon a person if they just don't get touched? I think it's different. Yeah.
Yeah, I can just say that there is a lot of research indicating the significance of touch. There's a fair bit of it on my website, even that I might point people towards. But ultimately, my thought here is that this is a decision that's been come to by ostensibly by their physician. You know, if a doctor is going to prescribe physical therapy, if a doctor is going to prescribe this, that, or the other thing, it feels like sex therapy is a viable option and something worth keeping on the list. And the idea that it would be stigmatized specifically or exclusively because it's sexual in nature, and that somebody would win an injunction from a court, be offered these opportunities, and then that somebody would, kind of like you said, Johnny, be trying to make a name for themselves on the Fox News or like the version of that is deeply upsetting to me.
Am I the only one that hasn't dropped at some point during this show?
Don't drop shame me.
Technology's complicated.
Yeah, I mean, can we make comparisons here to a person with chronic pain who needs the use of drugs that are maybe illegal in their community? Is chronic pain the same as not having sexual contact? I mean, I don't know. It's not for me to say.
Yeah, I was going to say that's way out of my ability to even really speculate on.
Christy's in a better spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly viable, right? Like, again, we don't know the details of the case. I don't know this person's medical needs. I'm not even a medical doctor myself by any stretch of the imagination. But I know that we wouldn't be having this conversation if sex wasn't such a icky topic, if it wasn't something that made people so uncomfortable. And to me, that is the story here. Recognizing that there was a potentially necessary, or at least a prescribed treatment that was allowed by the courts, that somebody decided was just on its face objectionable because the word sex is wrong and bad, and why should we? And that to me is really my challenge here. If somebody was trying to make a name for themselves in this same way and go on a crusade, so to speak, the way that Stuart Robert is at least accused of doing, because say somebody in a state that did not have medical marijuana was prescribed marijuana and was able to get a specific court ruling saying this will be useful for their cancer treatment, for their glaucoma, for their whatever. And then somebody says, well, I don't want tax dollars paying for marijuana, and then took it on in that way. That's how I view this article. That's how I view this story. But as we're getting over time here, I welcome our audience to disagree with me and to jump into the comments, to send us an email, to leave us a voicemail, and to really let us know.
Yeah, I'm absolutely looking forward to reading the comments on this video more than probably any other sex I've been on, because it's so nonprofit style. We're leaving stuff open-ended. We've had some discussion. But this show wouldn't be possible at all without the crew. Let's go to the crew cam and thank the beautiful people. Look at those beautiful people. We love those people.
So
Martin,
grateful.
where's your cat?
Thankful.
Where's your cat, Martin? Get your cat. Hurry up.
We're already running late, Martin. Get the giant cat.
There we go.
There we go. We got the cat. All right. That's what I needed to see. I wouldn't have been happy without the cat. I won't be able to. Okay. So, Johnny, where can the people find you?
The people can find me hither and thither and yon, and if I'm not on screen on the nonprofits, I'm behind the screen on the nonprofits. And check your local listings. I'll be on. I don't think I'm scheduled for AXP sometime in May. I think. But if anyone gets bumped, it's your poor old friend Johnny P. Angel gets bumped to make way for all kinds of other interesting guests, and I don't mind at all. I'm always around. But not hurt in the slightest. But hopefully I'll be back here again sometime soon. But yeah, tune into the nonprofits. It starts at, is it 3:00, Rudy and Christy?
It is in Central Time, which I am not on. So I almost said no just now. I was like, no, it's not 3:00.
Well, as the only actual Austinite here appearing tonight, yes, it will be on Sunday at 3. I will be on that episode, and special bonus right beforehand, I'll also be on Talk Heathen. So if you need some sexiness in your life, I'm coming at you hard.
Tune into all the ACA shows on Sunday. It's going to be a Christy extravaganza. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Let's plug our stuff. Like, for example, our Facebook Secular Sexuality fan group,
where we would love to hear your thoughts on any of these articles.
Yeah, I fully expect discussion. I will be disappointed if there isn't some. You can also go on another great place for discussion is our Discord, the tiny.cc/ACA Discord. It is a fan Discord. It's technically not the official Discord, but like we're all there. You know, we're all there, right?
It's a good time. We'd love to have the conversation with you.
Pop in and out.
And of course, you can get some SecX merch at bit.ly/AEN merch. And this has just been a marvelous show, everybody. This is the merging of two important pieces of me, and it has been just wonderful. The calls were great. The discussion was great. This was good.
I think so.
Yeah, well, if you are watching live, we would love to join you in that Discord server. We'd love to see you during the nonprofits, as we'll be in the chat and having those conversations. And I guess otherwise, we want to encourage everybody to merge different parts of themselves, perhaps. And if they would, to give themselves a big old orgasm. Or
better yet, give somebody else one. And put down a towel.
You beat me to it.